What happens when a 65-year embargo finally meets its match? Cuba has significantly deepened its economic and diplomatic engagement with China, a shift that could challenge the long-term effectiveness of America's longest-run Cold War policy. This isn't another trade deal or diplomatic gesture. This may signal a potential transformation in Caribbean geopolitics and raises questions about Washington's ability to rely on economic isolation as a coercive tool. The timing reveals everything about shifting global power dynamics. While Trump focuses on tariffs and threatens military intervention across Latin America, some analysts argue that Beijing's growing economic presence represents one of the most serious long-term challenges to American hemispheric influence since the Cold War. But this time, the threat isn't nuclear weapons. It's economic integration so comprehensive that traditional American leverage simply evaporates. China's new Caribbean strategy operates through infrastructure development rather than military confrontation. Chinese firms have discussed and proposed large-scale investments in port infrastructure in Havana, Santiago, and Cienfuegos. Expanded telecommunications cooperation could further integrate Cuba into China's global digital infrastructure. Energy cooperation may reduce Cuba's long-standing dependence on Venezuelan oil. Technology cooperation in pharmaceuticals could strengthen Cuba's role as a regional medical provider. Unlike traditional Western lending models, Chinese engagement is often presented as less politically conditional. They're genuine partnerships where Cuba maintains sovereignty while gaining access to the world's second largest economy. Chinese companies have discussed the possibility of establishing manufacturing facilities in Cuba's special economic zones. Joint ventures could potentially produce everything from electronics to automobiles for Caribbean and Central American markets. Banking relationships will enable direct yuan peso transactions, reducing reliance on dollar-enabled systems. These strategic implications extend far beyond Cuba's borders. Some U.S. officials worry that China's expanding economic presence could over time alter strategic assumptions just 90 miles from Florida. Security analysts warn that certain dual-use infrastructure projects could carry long-term intelligence and security implications. Port facilities capable of handling large container ships could gradually alter Caribbean shipping routes. Historically, great powers have viewed commercial port access as carrying potential strategic implications during periods of rivalry. American policymakers seem oblivious to how completely the regional dynamic has shifted. Decades of embargo enforcement trained Washington to believe that economic isolation could force political compliance. But that strategy depends on limiting a target's alternatives. China has systematically eliminated those limitations throughout the developing world, offering genuine partnerships without regime change demands. Cuba's decision reflects broader calculations about American reliability as a regional partner. Every administration since Kennedy has maintained embargo policies that punish ordinary Cubans while strengthening government control through siege mentality. Meanwhile, Chinese engagement offers immediate material benefits without political interference. Health care technology, educational exchanges, and infrastructure development provide tangible improvements to Cuban living standards. The psychological dimension matters enormously. For 6 decades, Cuban leadership has framed resistance to American pressure as a matter of national dignity and sovereignty. China's partnership validates that resistance by demonstrating that alternatives exist to American-dominated systems. Success in building prosperity through non-Western partnerships could inspire similar strategies throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. Regional implications could include a gradual reassessment of Caribbean security assumptions. Traditional American naval dominance assumed that Cuba remained isolated and dependent on distant Soviet support. Some in Washington fear that closer economic ties could eventually expand into limited security cooperation. Economic integration accelerates through multiple channels simultaneously. Chinese financial institutions may seek an expanded presence in the Caribbean, potentially including operations in Havana. Shipping networks will connect Cuban ports to Chinese industrial centers, reducing transportation costs for regional partners. Technology transfer agreements will enable Cuba to produce sophisticated electronics and machinery for export to neighboring countries. The embargo's long-term effectiveness becomes increasingly questionable if alternative economic partnerships continue to expand. Other Caribbean and Central American nations may observe Cuba's experience in building prosperity through Chinese cooperation. While American policies offer only threats and conditions, several Caribbean and Latin American nations have already explored deeper economic ties with Beijing. Trump administration responses reveal strategic confusion about managing this transformation. Military threats against Venezuela and demands for Panama Canal control appear desperate rather than strategic. Threatening established allies over hypothetical Chinese influence while China builds actual partnerships with previous American targets demonstrates complete misunderstanding of contemporary power dynamics. The historical precedent involves exactly the kind of strategic overextension that characterizes declining hegemons. Britain faced similar challenges when rising American power began attracting former British colonies and dependencies. Soviet influence collapsed when Moscow could no longer offer attractive alternatives to Western integration. American hemispheric dominance faces comparable threats when Beijing provides better terms without demanding political submission. Chinese strategy operates through patient accumulation of economic advantages rather than dramatic confrontation. Infrastructure investments create permanent interests that survive political changes. Technology transfers build local capabilities that reduce dependence on American suppliers. Financial relationships enable independent monetary policies free from Federal Reserve influence. Cultural exchanges strengthen ties between Chinese and Cuban institutions across multiple sectors. The demonstration effect could transform hemispheric relationships within a decade. If Cuba achieves sustained economic growth through Chinese partnership while maintaining political independence, other Latin American nations could seek similar arrangements. Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, and Chile already conduct substantial trade with China. If similar partnerships expand, they could significantly challenge long-standing patterns of American economic dominance. American strategic doctrine since the Monroe Doctrine has assumed that geographical proximity provides permanent advantages over distant powers, but modern transportation and communications technology have eliminated many traditional geographical constraints. Chinese shipping reaches Caribbean ports as easily as American vessels. Chinese capital flows arrive through digital networks instantaneously. Chinese technology transfers occur through satellite communications and internet connections. The financial architecture supporting Cuba-China integration bypasses traditional American oversight through currency swaps, Chinese development banks, and digital payment systems connecting Cuban businesses directly to Chinese supply chains. Intelligence implications transform regional security dynamics. Expanded cooperation in communications technology could reduce Cuba's reliance on traditional Western systems. Cyber defense cooperation protects Cuban infrastructure from attacks targeting Iranian and Venezuelan facilities. Some analysts argue that increased cooperation could eventually affect how maritime activity in the Caribbean is monitored. The technological revolution accelerates Cuba's transition from agricultural to knowledge-based economy. AI research centers develop Caribbean-specific applications. Advanced medical facilities produce pharmaceuticals for tropical diseases. Educational partnerships train Cuban engineers in Chinese universities while establishing technical schools. Military dimensions remain subtle but strategically significant. Chinese warships conducting goodwill visits establish precedents for regular naval presence. Joint exercises provide cover for intelligence gathering. Critics warn that dual-use technologies may carry long-term strategic implications during periods of great power competition. The cascade effect begins as Caribbean nations observe Cuba's success achieving growth without political submission. Dominican Republic explores similar arrangements. Jamaica initiates Chinese port discussions. Puerto Rico's movements question colonial status when independence enables Chinese partnerships. The final collapse of Cold War thinking becomes evident when decades-old policies produce exactly the outcomes they were designed to prevent. The embargo intended to isolate Cuba and demonstrate the costs of defying American power. Instead, it has driven Cuba toward the world's rising economic superpower and validated the argument that American partnership requires submission, while Chinese partnership offers genuine mutual benefit. Greater energy diversification through foreign technology could reduce Cuba's vulnerability to external pressure. Solar and wind farms reduce petroleum dependence. Battery storage enables grid stability. Electric vehicle plants serve regional markets. Legal frameworks create permanent institutions surviving political changes. Investment protection prevents American interference. Arbitration resolves disputes without Western-dominated courts. Intellectual property sharing benefits both economies. Cuba's transformation from isolated Caribbean island to integrated Chinese partner signals broader changes in global power distribution. Small and medium powers now possess alternatives to traditional dependence on regional hegemons. Rising powers can project influence globally through economic partnerships rather than military bases. Established powers must compete for influence rather than simply demand compliance. Cultural exchanges deepen relationships beyond government-to-government cooperation into genuine people-to-people understanding. Chinese language programs in Cuban schools prepare the next generation for integrated economic relationships. Cuban students in Chinese universities develop professional networks spanning both societies. Sister city arrangements facilitate business partnerships and cultural understanding that strengthen political cooperation. Beijing's message reaches every capital in Latin America and the Caribbean. Prosperity and sovereignty need not be mutually exclusive. Partnership with China offers genuine development without political interference. The United States can offer military threats and economic pressure. China offers ports, power plants, and telecommunications networks that materially improve people's lives. The 65-year embargo now faces its most serious long-term challenge in a rapidly multi-polar world. What emerges in its place will be determined by whether Washington adapts to multipolar realities or continues pursuing unipolar fantasies that the rest of the world has already abandoned. Cuba's choice suggests the answer. The future belongs to those who build rather than besiege.